Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book The City of Marble and Blood, the second book in the Chronicles of Hanuvar by Howard Andrew Jones. This is the big epic fantasy sword and sorcery series that borrows a lot from the history of Rome versus Carthage and the story of Hannibal, but it also borrows heavily from the type of storytelling style of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories. And so when you combine those two things, you get this series. And the first book in the series I reviewed, which is Lord of a Shattered Land, which I loved, great fantasy book, and I interviewed the author 2 times actually. Once when the book came out to promote the book, but I also interviewed him at DragonCon, which was a lot of fun, where he got both times he did the tremendous pitch that he has for the series. If you've never heard his pitch for the series, you should. It is tremendous. I do not think I have ever met an author who did a better job of pitching their books than Howard Andrew Jones does. It's great. And so The City of Marble and Blood follows up the events of Lord of a Shattered Land. You're following the story of Hanuvar, who is setting out to free his people, send them to the location that is secret, which is New Volanus, which is the new island where he is trying to rebuild his people and his society. And to do that, he has to go and find the slaves throughout the Dervan Empire, and he has to free them in some way without drawing attention to himself. Because if he draws attention to himself, the gig is up, and they'll find New Volanus and kill all the people, and everything will go wrong. So he has to do it kind of secretly. And so this book is about Hanuvar continuing his exploits from Book 1. But whereas Book 1, he's on the fringes of the Empire, and he's still in kind of the more wild lands, Book 2, he's in the heart of the Dervan Empire. He actually goes to Derva in this book, the capital, which is basically Rome. He basically goes to Rome in this book, so he's in the heart of the enemy empire. And in fact, the Dervan emperor shows up in this book, the equivalent for the Roman emperor. And oh boy, is it a good scene when he shows up. Much like Book 1, this book is written kind of where each chapter is like 30 or 40 pages long, and it's basically kind of like a short story in and of itself, but it is leading into the greater narrative, and each short story goes continues the overarching story, but has its own self-contained elements. It is the same in Book 1 as that. However, the through line is much stronger here because you're not traveling as far and you're not meeting as many new people quite as much as Book 1. In this one, you're seeing him slowly work towards, with the people he knows, towards fulfilling his different goals, just in different way with those people. So because of that, this book feels tighter, to say that. Which is weird. It's weird to say that, but this book is tighter than Book 1 because this book doesn't feel as each short story is so self-contained, but it's still a delightful book. You could really pick out any of the short stories in Book 1 and understand them for what they are. Book 2, the short stories, you kind of need to read them in order. You're gonna be a little bit lost if you don't. But still, I like that it's tighter because it put me more on the edge of my seat overall. Now, Book 1, one thing that made it stand out was the creatures, the magical creatures. Every chapter had a new magical creature, which was so different and unique and vivid. And just this is the creature from the first short story, the first chapter in this book, and it's just a great creature. I'm talking about the serpent-like thing, not the woman. But you have a new magical creature in every short story. This book doesn't really have many magical creatures. There's a handful, but it doesn't have that same element. Instead, this book deals more with magic. And I think, I don't know whether he said this in the interviews, but I know when I've talked to Howard Andrew Jones, he's basically talked about how as you slowly move out of the Volanus area, the Volani Empire, as you move towards the Dervan Empire, you start out with a lot of creatures because there's a lot of creatures in the wildlands. But Derva is much more civilized, and so Derva seems much fewer creatures, and instead it's the science, it's the magic of what they have that you're encountering more. So there's a lot of magic in this book. And it's not quite as overblown as some fantasy authors. My favorite writer of all time is Brandon Sanderson, and I love his writing. But the one criticism I have of his later books is that he gets so bogged down in his magic system that it gets a little bit tedious for those of us who don't care about magic and just care about the story and the characters. This one, while magic is becoming much more important, it is not a hard magic system. It is not as important it is not as convoluted. It is important to the story that it has it, which is why the magic is there, but it is not crazy difficult to understand. It's pretty basic magic stuff. It's kind of the way that, say, Terry Brooks would write magic. It's magic, magic makes the swords, work and stuff. There's one chapter in here where the magic goes up to an 11, and I was like, wow, I didn't know you were going to do that in this book. And it kind of reminded me of Anne McCaffrey's first book in her Dragon Riders of Pern series. That chapter, when you read it, you'll be like, oh, I see how you're connecting those two. It's not because it's a dragon, not because of the dragons, because of something they do with the magic. But this book, there's a lot of action. There's a lot more character work with the people around him. The first book was really, you got to see Hanuvar deeply, and then you saw little glimpses of the people around him. Maybe a little bit into Antares, who's traveling with him, but it's mostly about Hanuvar. This book is also mostly about Hanuvar, but the people around him get a lot more attention. And so you develop more feelings for the other characters. There's a kind of potential love interest in this book where there's a will they, won't they between Hanuvar and this woman, and I really enjoyed their will they, won't they. I thought that was really well done, and I really enjoyed her character. There's also two of Hanuvar's friends he meets up with in this book. One of them I know for sure was in the previous book. The other one, I'm pretty sure he was mentioned, but I don't know for sure, so I'm not going to spoil them. But two of his old friends show up in this book, and they're helping him out in different ways. And I loved reading about that. That was great to read. I loved reading about his friends helping Hanuvar out. And then there's also elements I really liked about revenge, about forgiveness, and about strategy. Hanuvar has to make some strategic moves in this book, which go against his personal beliefs, but also at the same time go to move him closer to his greater goal. I'll mention one of those. There's a chapter where there is a plot to assassinate the Emperor of Derva, his sworn enemy, the person who caused all of his people to be either murdered or captured and enslaved. But to fulfill his greater goal of reestablishing his people, he needs the Dervan Emperor to live. It is part of the greater goal. So what does he do? He has to thwart the assassin's attempt. So he has to save the one person he hates. It'd be as if Luke Skywalker is forced to save the Emperor Emperor Palpatine that he hates, or Darth Vader that he hates. It's that type of a thing where he has to protect his sworn enemy in order to gain his ultimate goal. And it's just superbly written. This book decreases the number of notes. There's still notes in every chapter just about, but they're not quite as used as much as the first book. And I think that they were a little bit easier to understand who was talking with each note. I think he got that. He knocked that better. The first book, I was able to kind of figure it out, but I had to really think about it. This book, it just kind of clicked a little bit more. That being said, I still firmly believe having three narrators for, like, if you're treating the book as, Howard Andrew Jones wrote the book, but in universe, it's as if there are three different writers writing this book. There's the person, Antares, who's traveling with Hanuvar, who's writing the book, and then you have this other historian, Silanus, who is kind of making little notes to fill in what Antares did, and then you have Antares's descendant, Andrikos, who is also making notes as the forward and the conclusion and other things that's also writing, and it's just unnecessarily convoluted. Just make it Antares. And just making it Antares would have been fine. Making it so that Antares maybe make it so that Antares wrote the book, and then the notes that he adds in are like, this is a revised edition, and by the way, I forgot to do this. But to make it three different narrators is just, to me, way unnecessarily convoluted. But it's still a great book. That's a minor problem with the book. It's still a tremendous book. It gets sword and sorcery storytelling just right. It gets an epic quest. It feels like you're going on a quest. I need to see what happens to Hanuvar in the future, things like that. So in that respect, it is superb. So I am loving this series. I think that Howard Andrew Jones is a terrific author. He's knocking it out of the park. I hope that his sales increase and that his stature increases among fantasy writers, because he deserves it, and it's just tremendous what he's turning in. There's very few writers who write fantasy in this way, and I love it when fantasy is written like this. By the way, there is a small thing that I was really nervous about that happens at the beginning of the story where a character looks younger than they actually are. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're doing this for XYZ reasons, and it's going to make the book so cliche, and I'm just going to hate it. And it's not what he did with the story at all. He went in a totally different direction. And I was like, oh, that's actually really cool. That's actually really well done. So good on you, Howard Andrew Jones. You made me lose faith in you, and then you made me regain the faith in your writing abilities all at the same time, all in one book, which is impressive for an author to do. So I love that. So that is my review. I'd give it like a 9.5 out of 10. City of Marble and Blood, great book. I really recommend it. Of course, I first recommend you read the first book, Lord of a Shattered Land, but it's also just a great book. So if you've read these books by Howard Andrew Jones, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And do you have similar books that you would recommend to me as a reader? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.